The leaders of Britain, France, Germany and Poland have agreed on Saturday to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire from the 12th of May with the backing of Donald Trump. They also threatened President Vladimir Putin with new massive sanctions if he failed to comply. The announcement was made by the leaders of Britain, France, Germany and Poland and Ukraine after a meeting in Kiev during which they held a phone call with Mr. Trump. Well, as we've been reporting, Sir Keir Starmer was among the leaders who went to Kiev to meet President Zelensky. Our chief political correspondent Henry Zeffman also went to Ukraine and he spoke to the Prime Minister. Here's what they said.
Prime Minister, we saw yesterday in Russia the leaders of China, Brazil, even an EU leader from Slovakia line up with Vladimir Putin in Moscow. To what extent was you coming here with European leaders today a direct response to that?
Well, it was a hugely important symbolic day here in Kyiv because, as you say, there was a propaganda exercise in Moscow yesterday. Today we're able to demonstrate that Europe stands with Ukraine. You had, the UK represented, France, Germany, Poland, and of course here with President Zelensky and many others that joined the call virtually. So 80 years on from VE Day, it was really important that we were here today. We actually made material progress in relation to a ceasefire, so that is an extremely good outcome. But it was also important to demonstrate that the values that underpinned what was being fought for 80 years ago were the same values now, and that we will step up and play our part to preserve the peace and bring about that ceasefire.
It's an impressive show of unity, no doubt, but Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president, has already said, shove these peace plans. So aren't they just another act of symbolism?
Well, we haven't seen unity like this pretty well throughout the conflict. So to get the European allies, US,
but Russia are saying, shove these peace plans.
Canada, all on one page. Putin, of course, cannot be trusted, but this now is a unified call for an unconditional ceasefire, backed up by sanctions. Now, there are sanctions in place at the moment. They're already having an impact on the Russian economy. So by further coordinating sanctions on oil, on fossil fuels, etc., will make a material difference. So you've got unity in the demand, but also unity in what the response will be if the demand is not met. We haven't seen that sort of unity during this conflict, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to bring people together in this way for what feels, I think, for all parties concerned, to be a really significant moment.
And do all those parties include President Trump? Obviously, you had him on Emmanuel Macron's speakerphone earlier. Is he growing increasingly exasperated with President Putin?
I think it's important to appreciate that it was President Trump that first made the proposal for the 30-day unconditional ceasefire. President Zelensky signed up to that 2 months ago, and we spoke to President Trump after our meeting here, and I'm absolutely clear that we're aligned in relation to this. In relation to his relationship with President Putin, well, he will better describe it than me, but I do think that he's absolutely clear that this is a demand that must be met.
You've nudged him some way, haven't you? You personally have.
Well, look, I think collectively we've been engaged with President Trump and his team for some time. We're constantly in touch with them. But what matters to me is not who moved who, but actually have we been able collectively to get to a much better position and a unified position today that holds out a better prospect of a ceasefire, which is desperately needed. Nobody wants a ceasefire more than the Ukrainians, who've paid a terrible price for the conflict over the last 3+ years. Have we got a step closer to that? Yes, of course. I'm not going to pretend this is the end of the process, but this is a significant moment. We need now to push on and make sure this happens.
As you say, the war has been going on here for more than 3 years. I think people see the Middle East and they see a situation there which only seems to be going worse. People will be concerned about India and Pakistan. I think a lot of people watch the news in Britain and they get scared about the state of the world. Do you feel scared about the state of the world?
Well, I do think that across the country there is a concern about the instability around the world, and people are talking more about that instability. We are living in a more uncertain world, and we're in a different era on defence and security. I think that what that requires is leadership, is stepping up, pulling countries together. That's why President Macron and I put together the coalition of the willing to show that Europe would step up and play our part, because I feel very strongly that we shouldn't only commemorate and celebrate what happened 80 years ago. Our task is to remember the lessons of 80 years ago, and we now have to step up to leadership positions to make sure that for decades to come people enjoy the peace that I've enjoyed during my lifetime. And so there's a real sense that we must now play our part, and I'm determined that the United Kingdom will be leading on that.
Does the state of the world keep you up at night?
No, it doesn't, because it's really important that I focus on what I can do, bringing people together, making significant steps today, making sure we're preparing with Ukraine what might happen next, because if there is a ceasefire, I'm going to have to respond very, very quickly, because what I don't want to see is a ceasefire that lasts a matter of days or weeks or months. We need a lasting peace. And that is really important, not just in Ukraine, but for everybody in the United Kingdom, because these conflicts have direct impact on the lives of working people in Britain. I'm very, very alive to that. They've seen their prices go up, their energy bill goes up. So the more we can do to play our part in stabilising the world, the better it is for working people in Britain. And so I understand the concern and the anxiety people have about what is going on around the world. My job is to make sure our country is safe and secure, and playing my part in ensuring that we de-escalate, bring about peace wherever we can, and therefore improve the lives of working people in Britain.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's Keir Starmer speaking to Henry Zephyr, and our correspondent Joe Inwood is here. The ball now in Moscow's court.
And they have said that the ball can be, as Henry pointed out, inserted somewhere, I think is the polite way of putting it. They were not that impressed, so it seems. That's Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman. He has essentially said this is not going to fly. I think it was Medvedev, the former president, who said that where it could be inserted. And the general tone that we're getting from Moscow is, well, look, what we have are preconditions, and those preconditions, one of the ones they've set out already, is no more European arms shipments, and then maybe we can talk. But they've always had a large number of preconditions, and I don't think anything we've seen today is going to change that. I think the really crucial thing that we need to look for out of this event, and it is fair to say this is symbolically important. This is a way of mirroring the events we saw for Russia's Victory Day parade yesterday, with a similar number or a large number of European leaders there offering their support to Ukraine. The other thing is it's Europe reinserting itself into this conversation, because when Donald Trump came in, he essentially bypassed Europe. There were talks negotiated and discussions that didn't have any European leaders there. Europe has said, no, we matter here, and we're upping our defence spending as a consequence. But what still matters is what the US says. Now, I've just been looking at the social media feed of President Trump on his own Truth Social site, and so far we've got lots of things being talked about, but not this. Yeah, and you wonder, is there a meaningful change in US approach? Well, I think when there has been a softening or a changing of the language over the last few weeks. We had, of course, just the quick timeline, we had that appallingly confrontational meeting between President Zelensky and Trump. Things got a little better subsequently with that meeting in the Vatican. And there has been a softening of the language over the last, couple of days, couple of weeks, with J.D. Vance saying that America asked too much. Whether they're going to, and of course they also want this 30-day ceasefire.